I'm I'm delighted to welcome Andy York, Human Rights Manager for Pilgrims UK, to the Scotland Against Modern Slavery podcast series. Andy can give a very compelling business case for why businesses should do more, not do nothing, but do more and go way over and beyond what I would say I've seen businesses do. So Andy can talk to us, or will be talking to us, about what that means and what it means to their business. So Andy York, thank you so much for joining me.
No problem.
Andy, you're a uh, your job title, first of all. Well, first of all, can I ask you, Pilgrims UK, what does your business do? What does your organisation do?
So we have 15 sites in the UK, employ around 7,000 people, and we make mostly pork-based products, sausages, bacon, chops, etc., for supermarkets as their own brand.
Yeah.
So our main customers are Waitrose, Co-op, Aldi, Tesco.
Okay. Fantastic. So again, in the retail supply chain, and your products ended up on the plate of most people watching these podcasts, I would suspect.
At some point, yeah.
At some point, absolutely. And your role, this is the bit that gets me really interested and quite excited about it. Your job title is Human Rights Manager for Pilgrims UK. So to me, first of all, it says that Pilgrims UK recognise the importance of ethical having an ethical and morally focused business, and it seems to me that you're in charge of that. Tell me a bit more about your job and what that means.
So it's very much a focus rather than the old ethical compliance and sort of tick boxing, really having some impact in our supply chain, whether that be at a farm level, because we do own farms as well, or in our factories, and also our wider supply chain. And it's really having that people focus. I look after modern slavery, and then anything to do with people on a human rights kind of ethical side. But it's definitely designed to be more practical than previous incarnations of whether you called it ethical trade manager, etc.
Yeah.
Things around that.
So
Where
it
it
says
tends to be a lot more focused on compliance.
so a kind of evolution of that so I suppose that traditional role, um, but it's encompassing a whole number of areas of your business. But to me, it seems to be that Pilgrims UK are leading the way and doing the right thing, and we're talking about exploitation, we're talking about modern slavery today, and your business. Well, sorry, we are based. I'm based up here in Scotland, and this initiative, this movement, Scotland Against Modern Slavery, is about sharing best practice across the business community up here, about showcasing businesses that are doing more, and that business case for doing more, and also I suppose sharing intelligence and just really raising awareness across the business community. We have support from Police Scotland, from the Scottish Government, the Gangmasters Labour Abuse Authority. They've thrown their weight behind what we're doing, Andy, and it's a network, I suppose. And I know that you're part of a number of networks, anti-slavery networks, in your areas. But what I'm keen to find out a bit more about is that your views and your thoughts and your story. So can you tell me a little bit, Andy, about how this evolution we've talked about, your role, and with regards to exploitation and modern slavery, what's behind all of this, Andy?
I think it's a business realizing that we have a responsibility for our site. So like other large food producers, we do use a lot of seasonal labor and casual recruitment agencies. But very much for us as a business, we've always felt that if there's a problem on our site, it doesn't matter who they work for, whether they work for us or whether they work for an agency. It's our problem to solve that. In a number of cases we've had, it's about working together with the labour provider, whereas I do know businesses, for example, who would just automatically say it's nothing to do with us, not employed by us, it's the labour provider's problem, and let them sort it out on their own.
Yeah. So you're taking a very proactive approach to this, and I think as well, thinking of legislation in the Modern Slavery Act and how that, and an interpretation of that about offloading responsibility to a labour supplier is not enough. You have to be part of it, and you're actually taking that one stage further. So you're, we've spoken before, Andy, briefly about victims and surviving that journey. In Scotland, we've seen a dramatic increase in the amount of victims of labour exploitation recently. Prior to the COVID pandemic, there was 512 victims in 2019 compared to 207 the year before, which is a significant jump. Kind of in line with what we've seen across the rest of the UK. But what we've seen as well, what I'm getting from on the ground is that through the pandemic, there's the numbers haven't reduced. Okay, at the start they did because there just wasn't reporting going on. Everything just stopped. But then it seemed the numbers start to creep up, get back to that same level, potentially more in some cases. And from your perspective, I think you're a business, your key worker status across, for the products that you're making as well. How has it affected you? So with regards to, first of all, I suppose in a roundabout sort of way, is COVID, labour exploitation, is there a connection?
Definitely. I mean, we've seen early in the first lockdown, it almost gives exploiters a perfect storm. So food businesses were seeing huge increase in demand. Agencies, etc., were struggling to cope with the normal back office checks, etc., that they would do because they were understaffed themselves. So it was a perfect opportunity for an exploiter to come in. And as I said, that did happen to us in the early part of the first lockdown, where we discovered 16 victims in total working at one of our sites.
So it sounds like that example, Andy, the exploiters, the criminals, the criminality behind it were very quick to react to the start of the pandemic. And, I have heard of anecdotal evidence of, exploited workers being sent to recruitment agencies with pre-prepared questions written out, answers to certain questions that an agency may use to identify them as a potential victim, but they've already been pre-prepared and scripted on this, which is very sad to see. And have you seen that before then going on? That people are prepped and ready to?
We've seen that, and also people from the criminal element infiltrating the actual labour providers themselves. So finding jobs with the labour providers so they know then how to circumvent checks and procedures or can avoid them. Full stop.
Which
because they're in a cut as well.
And it's about money, isn't it? And it's financial gain. You're absolutely right. Yeah, that's quite alarming, isn't it? And you've seen that.
Yeah, and you're talking. I'm not sure if people watching this would realise that you are talking significant amounts of money. In the case we've had last year, we're talking £1,700 per person per month. That we know the exploiter was making, and that's on top of any charges to get to the UK in the first place. So multiply by 16, that's a lot of money every month.
And that's at the core of what the issue is, I suppose, isn't it? It's that the financial return and exploiting and how that works. I know, and I think it's probably a good time to kind of showcase this, Andy, is that I know that you have championed in your business champions when you do identify victims, that you'll do something about it very, very quickly. I know that certain businesses haven't experienced this. I've seen this by talking to companies as well. When they identify victims, they want to get this away as quickly as possible. They don't want the publicity. They don't want the community knowing what's happened. They feel that they've been they've been harboured, exploited victims, and they want to get away. They just want anything. Don't want anything, ready. They're ready to just sweep it right under the carpet. There's the best only way I can describe it. That's what I've witnessed and learnt about in the sector. You don't do that at all, Andy. You just quite the opposite, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we're probably completely the opposite. So once we would recognise we have victims, one of the first things we would do is probably move them to a hotel for a few nights while we're dealing with trying to find out, is it actual exploitation or is it something else, and whether the GLAA need to be involved. We've only ever had one person want to go into the NRM, so that's not really an option that I would say most victims want to consider, especially if they're a couple. There's no guarantee they'll stay together, etc. Okay. So what we would tend to do is offer them a job, a full-time role. That's why they've come to the UK. That's what they're here for. And then support them into finding their own accommodation near the site, away from their controllers, getting any monies back for them, any property. And that takes time and it takes effort and it takes a lot of commitment from our site teams as well when this happens. Just to give you an example, when we took on this last tranche of victims, it took 8 hours to go through their contracts, and then you start a pack, because the last time they were given paperwork, it was all completed for them. They just signed something. They weren't even sure what it meant. So going through all their rights and what they're entitled to and what everything means is one of the most difficult things after, I would say, the most, which is establishing trust in the first place, to get them to realise that they are victims. Yeah. Because what a lot of them keep referring back to is, look, this is what I agreed in Romania. I'm better off via this than I was there. This is what I agreed with this person who's brought me here or who's controlling me. And that can take 3 or 4 different meetings with myself and the HR team, as well as the GLA, to get them to realise, no, this is what, by showing them on a calculator, literally, this is what you should have earned working these hours, and this is what you've got. And then everything else, this person is taken from you. Yeah. And that's illegal.
And it's an education then, and you've taken it upon yourselves. This is the bit that I find most impressive. It's about taking ownership of that, and taking that ownership as being another human, a human being, not just you, Andy, your business. You've talked about the sites, the production facilities. There's people there that have just taken this upon and said, what, we're going to help them. And that going through that education, sitting through, because you touched on this, and this is something I think I've kind of learned myself as well, is that not every victim knows that they're a victim.
No,
and that's
most don't, I would say.
So, and you have to go through an education to explain to them what that means. So interesting. It's really, really interesting. I think as well, you're talking about this taking somebody who's through that journey, and you've given them meaningful, wholesome work, the same work they were doing, but they're actually getting paid for what they do, and they can start their journey to becoming a survivor.
Yeah, and I guess the other part of what we do comes from when people come through the NRM. We're also part of a program called Bright Future, which was originally set up by the co-op, is now over 25 businesses and charity partners, and that's giving people a 4-week work placement initially, and then if it suits them and it suits us, then we don't even bother with an interview, we just give them a job. And seeing the difference that can make to somebody, of just getting them back into a full-time job, away from supported housing, into their own housing. It's and we've had 11 people, and 8 of them are still working with us full-time now. So we're trying to close off the loop from that end as well.
That's to me, you've got a model there that's continually supporting and helping, and that seems to be kind of ingrained in your business model. And you're in a business that's, it's food manufacturing, it's supporting the retailers, it's giving us, as consumers, what we want on our plates and giving us what we eat. But there's real morals and ethics, and well, your job title tells it all, doesn't it? Human rights.
And I think we're lucky with the customers that we do have, that, when we've had issues, our sites and discovered victims, we're perfectly in a position to be honest with them, and have a conversation with them, tell them what's happened, what we're doing. And there's no pressure from them ever. We're left to do it, as I think they realize we know what we're doing. And not everyone would be in that luxury, I would say, with some retailers are very different to others, unfortunately. But so you've got that side as well. Sometimes we don't even tell our own CEO when things are going on until they're all sorted. So you could be talking 4 or 5 days later. Because my directors are of the opinion, we know what we're doing. We have a process in place. We're following it. We're looking after the people. Point one is the main priority in the victims. So what comes out of that from a commercial and technical point of view, unfortunately, too many people interfering tends to make too many problems, and you can spend too much time just answering people. So there's having that side under control as well, that if you do have a problem, you have a process and a kind of set number of people who are in the know, so to speak, when they need to, and the rest find out if and when they're needed.
It's a compelling, again, another compelling business case, large scale business that are going above and beyond where most businesses are with regards to how they deal with this cases of exploitation in the workplace. And it's so refreshing to hear, because it's setting a standard, because as you raise the standard, others have to follow. And I hope, Andy, that we get to speak to you again, and we'll get you involved in Scotland Against Modern Slavery with our roundtables when they kick off, and get to talk to some of the businesses in Scotland about your journey and a bit more detail about the detail of what you've done. But Andy York, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Cheers.